Biden is still there in some shape or form, and he's obviously, for him, I think the Ukraine project was the most important thing of all. So he may have made this decision. We don't really know, but clearly he had the support of these other people. And the question is why? Okay, he always has the excuse of dementia. They don't. Neither does Keir Starmer. What's going on with these guys? And all I can say, I think it's partly what I've said before. It's just that they cannot get their, they went in supporting Ukraine. They tore up the Istanbul Agreement, told Ukraine, we're going to win this war. And that was their plan. And it didn't fail. And they didn't have a plan B, right? And they had that idea because they're still living in the 90s. They're still living in the unipolar moment where they could do anything without consequences. And where Russia was just was a pathetic beggar that they could kick around, as much as they wanted. And it seems like they can't let go of that. They still believe it on some level. It's crazy, but that's where they are. That's where, that's the way they look at the world. And otherwise it's hard to explain it because this is so very reckless. In the end, it could be really have some very serious consequences for NATO and for the U.S. But they don't have it. Back during the Cold War years, there was this healthy respect and fear of the Soviet Union. We didn't lie. We didn't love them. A lot of us hated them, but we feared them. We knew that we had to take them seriously, and we knew that they could unleash this Armageddon on us, and so we behaved in a sober fashion and worked out these these arms limitation treaties, and we made that we stepped back from the abyss. But the people who lead our governments now do not have that healthy fear. They just don't have it. Otherwise, how can you explain what they're doing? If they had that fear, if they really thought, you say, and I'll say this too, I think the chance of a nuclear war is very small. But any chance is just way too big a chance. If it's 1 in 10,000, that's much too big. 1 in 10,000, if we do this, the world ends. So we don't do it. It just does. There's no need, especially when there's zero military benefit. What are we doing? But these people just don't have that fear. That fear is gone. And I think the Russians are trying very hard to slap them in the face, slap NATO in the face, and they just have them wake up. They're in la la land, they're in dreamland. They used to, again, NATO was a formidable opponent, and the Soviet Union feared them, right? But the fear was mutual. But now they just don't have that fear. It's just sort of like they're drunk, and the Russians are trying to sober them up. So that's why, they did this. This was a demonstration. And then afterwards, Putin gave a speech and explained, this can strike any city in Europe. And these are nuclear capable reentry vehicles. So, you saw those impacts, those extraordinary impacts, coming down like lightning bolts from the sky. Each one of those could have been a nuclear bomb. That one missile could easily take out an entire city, like all of Paris or something. And so, please, look, I'm not, it's sort of funny. Even before, every once in a while, you get some news like, boy, this guy's a madman. He's threatening nuclear war. It's just, no, he's trying to wake you up and let you know how serious all this is. He has no intention, no need. Like I've said, we thank God the Russians are as strong as they are. There's no risk that Russia is going to fall at the present time. If there was a risk, we really would be on the verge of nuclear war. But as it is, it's just, who knows? We have crazy people in the West. There are always going to be accidents. There is a chance, even if Russia remains strong, and it will, there is always a chance of nuclear war. It's a non-negligible chance. And the fact that our Western leaders are just ignoring this is unconscionable.
I think the problem is that we fostered this environment really starting, I think, heavily around 2015 with the whole Russiagate hoax going around Trump, that it got to the point where we create this environment where you can't even talk to Russia. There's no communications. You know, you talked about the healthy respect back in the Cold War, but there was always lines of communication open. We were talking, we're drawing up treaties. Instead, our response is we can't talk to Russia at all. No, not a single person. Even us, if we just try to listen, if you just listen to Putin's speech, if you just listen to it as a politician in the West, you'll be labeled as somehow a Putin puppet. Even if you say you don't agree, it's like you can't even listen to the Russians. So it's a very dangerous environment that we've created. So I think the first step is to break that, to get out of that, to say like, let's start talking to them. Let's and you know, maybe that's hopefully what can cool things down with Trump if he is able to pick up the phone and begin communicating with the Russians. But to me it's unbelievable that the United States would take this move to shoot missiles into the world's largest nuclear superpower in the whole world. And there was no address to the American people. There was no deliberation. There was no democratic process. There was no talk. We haven't heard from Biden at all about it. This just happened, and I haven't heard of people.
Well, it's actually rather odd. You know, they never announced that they're going to do it. Remember, it was just a leak in the New York Times.
Right. And then the White House hasn't ever said anything.
Yeah, and then when they're asked about it, they don't say anything. So, you know, I think that's a reflection of maybe the profound disagreement within the administration. You know, and maybe especially between the Pentagon and the State Department. So the Pentagon just obviously was opposed to this. So anyway, it's bizarre and it's absolutely really insane. I mean, it's just like there's just no way. There's no way to justify this. There's just no way.
Right.
But they're doing it.
I mean, I feel like if you made a movie about this whole scenario 20 years ago, people would just say, this is a stupid movie. There's no way this could ever happen. It's so implausible.
Exactly. Well, that's true of like 90% of the stuff that happens these days. I mean, really. I mean, we just have a completely clueless ruling class. You know, again, it goes way beyond idiocracy. And Biden himself, I think, just embodies it better than anything. You listen to his speech, and there's just this evil, demented, cognitively impaired zombie, you know, is running the country. And it's what the heck is going on?
Right. What is going on? I mean, I just wish people would take a step back and just look at it and just say, like, what are we doing here? Well, what is the point of this? Why should Americans care, or Europeans? Why should anybody other than the Ukrainians care about who governs Ukraine? Like, how does that affect us in the United States? Like, why is this worth destroying the whole world over, or killing all these people for? Maybe we should let the Ukrainians have a vote. Maybe we talk about democracy. Maybe let them hold elections. And see what happens.
They did have one, and actually they elected a president who wanted to maintain good relations with Russia, but the EU and the US was not happy with that, and that's why we got the coup in 2014.
Right,
and it has to be remembered that back then only 20% of Ukrainians supported NATO membership. But already, you know, the U.S. president, I guess it was back in 2008, it was George W. Bush, announced that Ukraine would become a member of NATO. Again, this was against the wishes of the Ukrainian people. So anyway, you know, again, there's no justice. Even, you know, this is all, you know, all this nonsense about supporting Ukraine is always framed in terms of some kind of justice. You say, well, let's say even if that were true, just grant them that. And you say, okay, the Russians are aggressors, you know, their invasion was completely unjustified and so on and so forth. You grant them that, but you still have to be realistic and you have to look at the consequences. Again, you know, during the Cold War years, the Soviet Union clearly unjustly, and we all felt that, it invaded Hungary, you know, suppressed a rebellion then. They did the same in Czechoslovakia. And you know, these actions by the Soviet Union they were universally condemned by Americans and by the West in general, you know, and I think with good reason. But nobody said, well, okay, we need to go to war over this. We need to start sending arms into Czechoslovakia or Hungary because people, actually had, our leaders still had, were of sound mind. And they said, we don't like this, but we cannot risk a third world war over this. But we don't have those kind of people. So even if you say, okay, this is all unjust, this is just like the Soviet Union back in the 1950s and 1960s. Well, you still have to be realistic and avoid World War III and for the greater good, right? You just can't decide. I mean, the way they talk, they just won't consider anything else. But I think the fact is they do not have justice on their side. I mean, that's just a lie. They've rewritten history, and but we've talked about that earlier.
Right. So I am almost kind of struggling with what the mainstream narrative is on why we need to be supporting Ukraine and why we need to keep on pumping money in there. What is the reason that the political elites in DC, London, Brussels, what are they giving? Why we have to do this? Is it just because this idea if we don't, then Russia's just going to roll right all the way through into Paris and Brussels and London? Is that really the only argument they have? What are they saying?
Well, they say different things at different times, and some leaders have made that that latter argument, at least on a few occasions. Other times they just say that, well, Russia just can't get away with this. This was terrible. This was an unprovoked, unjustified, full-scale invasion, and if anything, we at least have to make it hard for them, raise the cost for them so they don't try it again. They learn their lesson. You can't do this. But then you have other people who are saying, well, this is, and Lloyd Austin said this quite openly back in 2022, this is a chance to weaken Russia. And I think that's really what they were looking at initially, is that's why, NATO went all in on this and told Zelensky to tear up the Istanbul Agreement. Said that we can, we'll support you, you'll win. But they're telling themselves, it's like whatever happens, we can weaken Russia. And obviously they failed on all accounts. No matter how you look at it, they failed. But they just apparently don't have a plan B, and they just can't, they just cannot accept what's happened. So they just keep on doubling down, and so the most recent is, of course, the lifting of these restrictions. They keep on doing things they said they weren't going to do earlier because everything they do fails. If their earlier moves had succeeded, like if supplying Abrams tanks or supplying F-16s really made a difference, then they would have stopped there. But nothing works. Nothing has made any difference at all. The Russians continue to move forward. The Russians continue to get stronger. The Ukrainians continue to get weaker. So they just keep on crossing red lines, their own red lines. And in this case, it's also a Russian red line. But it becomes more and more absurd as they go along. Like initially you think, well, maybe HIMARS will really make a difference. And for a couple of weeks they did. Maybe,
F-16s.
Abrams tanks or whatever, but none of them did. But there's just no way, even the Pentagon's been saying, there's just no way this is going to make a difference. There's just no way. So why are you doing it? Just that I think you have these people, politicians who just cannot think in a rigorous way. They're just locked into narratives and, they strike poses and that we have to stand by Ukraine and we must be tough and whatever. And so that's what they do because that's, that makes them look tough. That makes them, look like they're standing by Ukraine. But it doesn't actually mean anything. I'm sure there are people who try to explain to them, but I don't think people understand those kind of arguments. They just inhabit that world of political rhetoric.
Right. Well, Putin said that this regional conflict provoked by the West has now acquired global elements. So he is, he is saying that this is now that basically NATO is a co-belligerent in this war.
Yeah, well, he's made that clear many times. It's not just like he made an off-the-cuff remark once. He's probably said this at least half a dozen times. And so this is the clearest of red lines. There's just no doubt about it. And we're just ignoring it.
Yeah, but just everything you're saying right now that there's no military strategy here, there's no real military objective, but despite that, our response is to just be ideological or just to hunker down and just continue to demonize Russia nonstop, and we will circle the wagons. And we've already fired some more Storm Shadows, apparently, you're saying. Yeah. So do you think that this is what's going to happen? Is that despite this very clear warning from Putin, from
Yeah.
Russia, and a display of power, that we're going to ignore it again, and then we'll continue to do what we're doing until Russia is going to have to respond again, and then it's just
And
this,
Yeah.
But then what we'll hear from the West, and so you're saying. I'm worried. Should we be worried? I mean, are you worried?